But what if it actually produces isolation? We call it strength, but don't be surprised when it becomes the reason your relationships never become what God intended them to be. One of the most celebrated qualities in our culture is the first lie Satan ever convinced humanity to believe. Think about the garden. Satan never told Eve to stop believing in God. He convinced her she didn't need God to determine what was good and what was evil. You decide. You become like God. You determine what's best for your life. Think about that for a second. The first lie wasn't, there is no God. The first lie was, you don't need him. We still celebrate that same lie today. We just call it independence. We celebrate independence because we think it produces freedom. But what if it actually produces isolation? We call it strength, but don't be surprised when it becomes the reason your relationships never become what God intended them to be. What if the thing we call strength is the very thing keeping us from becoming who God created us to be? The opposite of dependence isn't strength, it's self-reliance. And it robs you from truly experiencing life the way God designed it to be. The strongest people in the Bible were never the most independent. Moses depended on God, David and Paul depended on God, and especially Jesus. I can do nothing on my own. Think about how different that is from the world we live in. Our culture tells us to depend on yourself, to trust ourselves, follow our heart. God says, abide in me. Trust and rely on me. Pick up your cross and follow me. Those are two completely different ways of seeing life. Why would God tell us to abide, trust, and follow him? Because you can't reflect the character of someone you refuse to stay connected to. Jesus says, abide in me. Why? Because transformation doesn't happen because you know more about God. It happens because you spend time with him. You begin seeing what he sees, loving the way he loves, forgiving the way he forgives, serving the way he serves. Then Jesus says, trust me, especially when life doesn't make sense, especially when everything inside of you wants to take control. Trusting God isn't believing you'll understand everything he does, because you won't. It's believing his character when you don't understand his plan. Then Jesus says, follow me. Not because he wants to control you, but because he wants you to follow him, and he knows by you following him, it will transform the way you see everything. He wasn't just changing behavior, Jesus was changing perspective. Because once your perspective changes, your decisions change. And your decisions eventually become your life. The world tells you the answers are already inside of you. God says, seek and you shall find. Don't be surprised when you spend your life searching for answers, if you've been looking in all the other places God never told you to look. We know exactly how to love because God showed us. We know what true forgiveness looks like because God demonstrated it. We know what sacrificing ourselves for our wife, our children, and our community looks like because Jesus sacrificed himself for us. We know how to serve others because Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. The problem isn't that we become independent from people. It's that we become independent from God, whose character relationships were designed to reflect. Because if I don't know how God relates to me, how am I supposed to know how to relate to my wife or my children or my friends or my community? Everything flows downstream from God's character. Because if you're out of alignment with God, every other area of your life eventually begins drifting out of alignment too. Every relationship eventually reflects the lens you are looking at life through. Think about your marriage. If your lens says, I don't need anyone, don't be surprised when asking your spouse for help feels like weakness. Don't be surprised when you can't be vulnerable with them, because somewhere along the way, you became convinced vulnerability makes you weak. Don't be surprised when it suddenly feels like there's a wedge between the two of you. Your spouse isn't just experiencing your behavior, they are experiencing the lens at which you look through life. And eventually, they begin looking through that same exact lens, and it affects their life and their worldview. Lenses don't just stay with the person looking through them, they eventually become the way everyone around them begins seeing the world. The same thing happens with your children. They don't just learn from what you teach, they learn from what you model. They see when your marriage is disconnected. So don't be surprised when they grow up disconnected from their spouse. They see when your career, your success, or your ambitions become more important than your relationship with God. So don't be surprised when achievement becomes the thing they spend their life chasing. They don't just hear what you tell them is important, they watch your life, and what you demonstrate is important. But if they watch you trusting God, loving your spouse, and serving your family, and continually depending on God the Father, they begin learning what dependence actually looks like. Your children don't just inherit your habits, they often inherit your worldview and how you see life. The same thing happens with your friendships. Independence tells you, handle it yourself. Don't let people get too close. You have to protect yourself. So don't be surprised when your friendships never move beyond surface level, because intimacy requires trust and vulnerability, and trust requires dependence. Every friendship eventually reflects the lens both people are bringing into the relationship. The same thing happens in your community. Independence says, I don't need anyone. So people stop serving. They stop carrying one another's burdens. They stop showing up. They stop asking for prayer. Then they wonder why loneliness keeps increasing. And then we wonder why loneliness in our world keeps increasing. We shouldn't be surprised. We've been celebrating the very thing that makes genuine community almost impossible. The same thing happens in the church. Church slowly becomes a place you attend instead of a family you belong to. We consume sermons instead of carrying one another's burdens. We critique worship instead of becoming worshipers. We evaluate churches instead of becoming the church. And then we wonder why the church feels disconnected. We shouldn't be surprised. Every relationship, every family, every friendship, and community alongside the church will eventually begin reflecting the lens of the people inside it. And I think we've misunderstood God's commands. God wasn't giving us a list of rules to follow. He was revealing his character. I mean, think about it. We know exactly how to love because God showed us. We know what true forgiveness looks like because he demonstrated it, right? So if we have the blueprint on how to live our lives, why are we not adhering to it? It makes no sense. Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. Everything that Jesus did, he was demonstrating on how we should live our lives. Everything God asks us to become, he first revealed about himself. The world tells you, be true to yourself. God says, be transformed by me. That's a huge difference. The world tells you to look within. God says to look up at me. Because if you don't know God's character, how will you ever recognize what he designed? How will you know what love actually looks like, apart from the one who is love? How will you know what forgiveness looks like and how to demonstrate that, apart from the one who really truly forgave you? How will you know what sacrifice looks like, apart from the cross? How will you know what serving others looks like apart from the Savior who knelt down and washed dirty feet? Who do you know that will wash your dirty feet? I mean, seriously, answer the question. I know you're thinking in your head, you probably wouldn't wash somebody's feet. And a couple years ago, I wouldn't either. But everything flows downstream from God's character. So now I would, because I'm trying to live a life of servitude, serving my family, serving my friends, my community, and serving others in the workplace. That's why the greatest problem in our culture isn't political, it's not economical or even relational. It's that we've become disconnected from the very God whose character our lives were designed to reflect. Because if you're out of alignment with God, like I said before, don't be surprised when every other area of your life slowly begins drifting out of alignment. But the opposite is also true. The closer you become to God's character, the more your life naturally begins reflecting it. Your marriage begins flourishing because your spouse experiences patience instead of pride, grace instead of control, sacrifice instead of selfishness. Your children don't just hear you talk about God and attend church on Sundays with you. They experience what He's like through you. Your friendships become deeper because people feel safe enough to be known authentically instead of pretending they have it all together. Your community becomes stronger because people stop asking, what can I get? And they start asking, how can I serve? Your church stops feeling like an event that you attend and starts becoming a family you belong to. Not because everyone suddenly became perfect. It's because people became aligned with the heart of God. That's what dependence produces. Not weakness, transformation. The question isn't whether you're depending on something, because everyone's dependent on something. The question is, who or what have you been depending on? If you've been depending on yourself, don't be surprised when one day you look at your life and think, how in the world did I get here? Because every decision you've ever made flowed through the worldview that you were looking through. The opposite of dependence isn't strength, it's self reliance. And it robs you from truly experiencing life the way God designed it to be. I don't think Satan's greatest strategy was convincing humanity to stop believing God. I think it was convincing humanity that they could live apart from Him. Because if He can separate you from the one whose character you were created to reflect, every other area of your life eventually begins drifting towards that direction as well. There'll be separation amongst each other. Your marriage will be affected. Your relationship with your children, your friends, and your community will be affected. You will view church quite differently than you should. That should be your family. Everything flows downstream from God's character. But here's the incredible part. God never stops pursuing us. The same God Adam and Eve hid from, God came looking for them. The same God we continue trying to live without continues inviting us back into relationship with Him. Not because He wants something from us, because He wants something for us. The invitation has never changed. Abide in me, trust me, and follow me. Because God has never been trying to make your life smaller. He's been trying to show you the life you were created to experience, not one built on fear, not one built on pride or self-reliance, a life built on trust, dependence, sacrifice, and real love, because that's exactly who He is. The closer you come to God's character, the more life begins reflecting it. Your marriage begins to completely flourish. And I know this because I now lead a Bible study with my wife. It's insane, the transformation that the good Lord has provided to me. Your children begin experiencing what the love of the Father actually looks like. My friendships are so much deeper. The community is so much stronger because the lens at which I look through life has changed. That's what happens when you start following Christ. When your life comes back to alignment with God and who you were designed to be. So, the first lie Satan ever convinced humanity to believe was that we didn't need God. Don't be surprised if we start believing the same lie. That lie produces the same separation in all our relationships because the issue has never been independence. The issue has always been, who are you depending on? And maybe the life you've been searching for hasn't been waiting for you to become more independent. Maybe it's been waiting for you to become more dependent on God and who you were created to be.